Good evening. I'm Megan, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome Wesley Brown to our At Home with Literati series in support of Tragic Magic. He will be in conversation with Derecka Purnell. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping links to purchase Tragic Magic from Literati throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time. I'll ask a selection at the conclusion of the event. A reminder that you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. We are also open for in-person shopping. We ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. You can think of it as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription. Donations can be made at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance. And now allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Wesley Brown is the author of 3 published novels and a collection of stories, Dance with Infidels, and 4 produced plays, including Dark Me on a Funny Mind. He is Professor Emeritus in English at Rutgers University and has taught literature, drama, creative writing at Bard College at Simon's Rock. He wrote the narration for a segment of the 1997 PBS documentary, W.E.B. Du Bois, a biography in 4 voices, and is the co-editor of the Methuen Anthology of American Women Playwrights, 1970 to 2020. A new edition of Brown's first novel, Tragic Magic, will be published by McSweeney's in 2021. He lives in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Derecka Purnell is a lawyer, writer, organizer, and author of forthcoming Becoming Abolitionist, Please Protest in the Pursuit of Freedom. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and trainings in community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. As a Skadden Fellow, she helped to build the Justice Project at Advancement Project's national office, which focused on consent decrees, police and prosecutor accountability, and jail closures, providing community training, political education, and legal representation to organizers. Her advocacy efforts led to the dismissal of over 3,000 cases based on unconstitutional policing practices. Additionally, she supports several campaigns and grassroots organizations around the criminal legal system, electoral justice, and community investment, including Action St. Louis, Dream Defenders, Communities Against Police Crimes and Repression, the Ferguson Collaborative, and the Movement for Black Lives. Derecka also organized the founding steering committee for Law for Black Lives, a growing network of 5,000 law students, lawyers, and legal workers to support social movements. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, Derecka co-created the COVID-19 Policing Project, the community resource hub for safety accountability. The project tracks police arrests, harassment, citations, and other enforcement public health orders related to the pandemic. Derecka received her JD from Harvard Law School, her BA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and studied public policy and economics at the University of California, Berkeley. As a public policy and international affairs law fellow. Her writing has been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar, Teen Vogue, The Appeal, Truth Out, Slate, Boston Review, Huffington Post, Vox, and Indies Times. She's been on NPR, Democracy Now!, Slate's What's Next, and MSNBC, and is the former editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy. Derecka has lectured, studied, and strategized around social movements across the United States, the Netherlands, Belgium, South Africa, United States, and Australia. She is from St. Louis and lives in DC.
Hi, I think it's on us.
Yeah.
Yes. So what a day, right? What a day. When I finished the book, that was the first expression that I felt. I was excited and exhausted and just could not believe the wonder, the curiosity, the adventure that happened in one day with this book, with Tragic Magic. And then I also realized, unfortunately, so much violence can be so spectacular and yet so mundane, in the lives of, young Black men. And so thank you for writing this wonderful novel. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you about its reissue.
Well, thank you for agreeing to moderate our conversation.
Yeah, of course. So what prompted you and what energized you in writing this novel?
Well, I was in a workshop back in 1970 at the County Cullen Library in Harlem with Sonia Sanchez and many other fledgling writers. And so writing poetry and being studying with both Sonia Sanchez and John Killens, I began writing poetry and short stories. So I started writing a novel about a young Black man coming of age during the 1960s, but who was raised in the 1950s. And that had been my original impulse. But when I was incarcerated for refusing induction into the Army from 1972 to 1973, when I was released, the whole trajectory of the novel changed. And a friend of mine suggested to me correctly that I needed to perhaps change the trajectory of the novel to include the prison experiences I had, given that the subject of the novel was about a coming of age, a young Black man, and what the travails that he has to deal with in terms of his being shaped in this country by sort of various narrow male postures, and how he has to come to terms with that. Even though he sees himself as an activist, he still is imbued with those assumptions that he grew up with. So both his activism and his prison experience, he's still undergoing this discovery of himself even after he is released from prison. And as you point out, the novel takes place during a single day on the day of his release, but there are flashbacks into his past.
Right. I am so excited to talk about the narrow notions of masculinity. But before we jump there, how would you summarize the story in a few sentences? I know I'm so sensitive to spoilers. If I think anyone is going to give away a spoiler, I immediately stop them from telling the story. So rather than me offering a summary, I thought it would be best if you describe it in a few sentences.
Well, Melvin is released from prison on a particular day, and he returns to his old neighborhood, which is in Queens in New York City. And he begins to get in touch with friends that he grew up with. And he decides to hang out with them, and they kind of have a journey through the night at various night spots, parties, clubs. And so what occurs during that period of time, there are some revelations, discoveries that he makes, what he discovers about two women that he grew up with, and also his best friend who was in Vietnam and lost an arm. And so all of these encounters are where the story projects forward. So I hope that's not giving up too much, but that sort of what animates or propels the story, the novel forward.
Yes, and what I love about this story, given the genre, to call it prison writing isn't quite fair. But I had been used to reading stories about people who have been incarcerated and they're coming out, or they're trying to find their way. But the presentation of his life, why he's incarcerated in the first place, the type of family he comes from, the type of arguments that he has. We see him constantly shifting across various class dimensions, across ability. Actually, by the time I got to the end of the book, I really thought about disability as a huge actor in the story, right? So you talked about his friend Otis, who loses his arm in Vietnam, but I also thought about Deborah, his sister, who talks about looking and appreciating the vulnerable state of men of grown Black men while they're in the hospital. His dad, who has his injury in the factory. I mean, there's all these other intersections, right, around carcerality, around disability, around masculinity. I was just curious if what came, did you make these decisions intentionally, to weave in these stories, or did you notice them after the project had been completed?
Well, for me, I learn most about what I'm writing as I write. I don't necessarily have a plan. I don't do outlines, um, but I'm always looking for moments that are unpredictable, surprises, and I can't discover the surprises unless I continue to write. So those are, I didn't set out to tell this particular story, but obviously I had some thoughts, some images, and I started writing, and I was sort of pulled along by these characters. And I guess for me, a novel truly comes to life when you realize as a writer that you're not necessarily in control. A writer that I was very much inspired by, William Melvin Kelly, once said that write about don't write about what you know, write about what you don't know. Then you can control it. And I think writing about what you don't know is more of a journey of invention, of the imagination. You can go anywhere. But if one is a writer is just confined to facts, or as he or she perceives those facts, it seems that for me, there's something very constraining about that. And so in writing a novel, I think for me, it frees me up to not worry about whether something is factual, but more importantly, whether something is truthful as far as human behavior.
Yeah, I love that so much and am quite envious of it, quite envious of the exercise of writing, of the art and exercise of writing about what you don't know, because there were several parts in the book where I wanted to know whether it was factual or the truth, right? I
Mhm.
found myself Googling, trying to figure out what is film static? Like, is this real? Like, I needed to know if it was real. So that level of freedom and artistic expression is beautiful, because what we get, from the novel, again, as someone who's a lawyer who organizes in the criminal legal space, there's facts and there's figures and there's arguments, but through fiction writing, you're able to just show and demonstrate, like, rather than tell us, right? You don't have to tell us the statistics around sexual violence in prisons, right? You can give us the story about someone who's vulnerable and show us through his relationships, right? With Chili or with Hard Knocks, that vulnerability that still captures the truth of violence. And I thought that was just, yeah, it made me think about all the reports I've read or I've been a part of. And I was just like, we just need the story of Chili, right? We need this kiss, like we need this fight. Like, this is what I'm trying to get to.
Mhm.
And I thought that was great. So yeah, can you speak a bit more about the narrow notions of masculinity and manhood that Melvin experiences? We get him in college and then in prison now that he's out. So I would love if you could talk about what he learns, what he discovers, what he experiences.
Mhm. Well, I think in his formative years growing up, he realizes that the tribalism among males has a lot to do with the exercise of power, physical strength, and also intimidation, which is sort of an aspect of physical strength. And so he is trying to become that kind of young person, but he realizes that he's not particularly adept at trying to use bravado and a lot of intimidating language as a way to enter the fold and sort of rise in the hierarchy. So he has to find another way. And he uses his ability to sort of talk his way into and out of situations where he could be in jeopardy. And so that's one of the lessons he learns growing up. And at the same time, still wishing that he could be another kind of male, but he just he can't perform that notion of masculinity, even though he tries mightily. And I think his ability to talk of course, is why they nickname him Mouth, uh, has something to do with his experiences after he leaves his old neighborhood and going to college during the 60s. And he discovers that there is a level of rhetoric in the 1960s that in many ways sets up a similar kind of hierarchy that is also about power, force, and how many Black men during that period saw themselves as attempting to become what their notion of manhood was. You see the images of kind of the uh, presentation of Black maleness with either dashikis or black leather jackets from the Black Panther Party. And these were, groups that had they had significant things to do that they were attempting to raise, but there was still this veneer of masculinity that gave, for many young Black men, kind of credibility to that for many was as important or more important than the issues. You had to perform or present yourself as someone who not only knew what you were talking about, but also could back it up with being physically able to overpower someone else. And Melvin discovers that there is not a great deal of difference from the notions of what being a man an adolescent male and being a young Black man as he matures into sort of a larger world, and particularly within among people who are in a struggle, which is attempting to do precisely the things to sort of unearth or disrupt the kinds of issues and postures that Black men have adopted. And that movement, of course, is implicated and in some ways acts out the very same things that this movement is trying to change. So he also discovers that. And then once he it refuses to go in the army, he, not surprisingly, finds the same hierarchies from his childhood, from being politically active. And he runs up against some questioning by men who are incarcerated, who have not had the privilege or the benefit of going to college, and are kind of wary of him. I guess one character says, well, if you decided you didn't want to go in the army because you didn't believe the system, then why did you allow yourself to come here if you don't believe in the system? And he has to sort of set back on his heels because he has to grapple with that. So so in all these various incarnations, and even when he gets out of prison, his relationship with his friend that he grew up with,
Otis, right?
Otis, again, he's pitted against. He realizes that he has always tried to reflect himself or within Otis, because Otis seemed to have the kind of prowess of a male figure that Melvin admired. But he begins to discover that there is a great deal of vulnerability within Otis that can in some ways reflects his own vulnerability. So it doesn't much matter which kind of male posture that they present, whether it's more expansive or narrow, both of them still have to deal with the kind of notions of what they believe a man is supposed to be, that is baked in to their psyches. And it's something that has to be, you have to actively do something to change that. I remember there was an essay I remember reading by Samuel Delany, just an extraordinary writer of what might be called speculative fiction or science fiction. And he said that he had a conversation with another man who said, I have never made a sexist decision in my life. And Delaney's response was, well, all the sexist decisions have already been made prior to your arrival, and that the only decisions that can be made are anti-sexist decisions. So I think that applies both to Melvin as well and all of the male figures, is that we arrive here with already the infrastructure of
Mhm.
male dominance, and the choice that we have, only the choice that we have is to find a way to act and behave and live in a way that creates another version or several other versions of what it means to be a man. And it has to be active. It has to be practiced. It can't be
Right.
something that is intellectual or something where it becomes a game. So I think that that's what Melvin's journey, or it's a part of what it's about.
Yeah, wow. So much there. So much there. Where to even start, with his mouth, it's ironic that you talk about he finds that reflection of himself in Otis. He admires how Otis moves in the world, how he is with women. Also, a bit critical, but admires it because he doesn't see himself as that. We also see that a little bit too in his relationship with Theo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Theo is not necessarily doing that with women, but he's doing that politically, right? He's able to call a crowd into a room. He's able to shut down others seeming, alpha men. He's able to, we know what happens with Keith, but he's able to inspire people to like move on the basis of his words. From the novel, it's Otis represents something with women. I saw Theo as representing something with, politically, and then Chili, interestingly, is referencing something with men inside of prison. And so there's these different versions of how to navigate masculinity in relationship to these other like structures of relationships with different kinds of people, and ultimately the men that he followed ultimately get in trouble themselves, right? And it's it's Melvin who seemingly gets to navigate that. So I thought that pretty fascinating. And then even, the notion of toxic masculinity, I feel the spirit of Audre Lorde like hovering above me. So I got to make sure I get this right. But it's interesting that toxic masculinity also manifests differently for different kinds of men, right? It's mitigated by race, it's mitigated by class and status, and the way that society disables us mentally and physically. And where I saw a lot of these men display toxic masculinity in different ways, I also did see their vulnerability to the state, right? So it's vulnerable to prison violence, vulnerable to war and militarism, vulnerable to the United States government control over their body, or to white people control of their neighborhoods, which is how the novel starts. So I'm just curious about how you see vulnerability also manifest for the same men who have these displays of toxic masculinity.
You mean in various characters?
Yeah.
Well, I think Chile was fascinating for me because within the environment of prison, that it's very much a reflection of the world outside. It was, I think, Dostoevsky who said, if you want to know something, all you need to know about society, look at its prisons. And for Chile, this prison environment is a more enhanced or extreme version of what takes place outside. And that men have this sense that somehow they have to enact a similar kind of power relationships. And since there are no women, there's a sense that the men have to, in order to behave like men, as they perceive men to be, they have to find some group that they can identify with so that they won't become isolated and be a victim. And also, power is also demonstrated through domination in the way of sexual violence. And there are men who, like Chile, who believe that if they dominate a man sexually or rape a man in prison, or even have a consensual relationship, they perceive that they're the dominant figure, and that the other man is a woman. or someone who has to be submissive. So it's not as they don't, Chili wouldn't ever conceive of himself being in a gay relationship. He believes that he is the man and whatever, and he has to dominate the man who he is involved with. And so that means he retains his manhood as he defines that. And it's the other man who is feminized. And so I think that's something that happens in the prison environment with someone like Chili, and the whole dynamic that goes on with Chili, Cadillac, Hard Knocks, and all of these men, that they have to find some way to find a space where they can dominate and not be vulnerable to attacks, physical or otherwise. So I think that's one of the ways in which masculinity plays itself out in this most extreme environment.
But how do you see the prison as also an actor? So what you said earlier about, I can't remember who you quoted, say, whether or not you make an individual sexist decision, the decisions have already been made. And I sort of think of prisons the same way, right? Whether in any of those individual men decide, and it's not to say they don't have agency, but I'm curious about the nature of the prison and of militarism, right? These two big actors that loom throughout the story as attempts to remove agency from people to protect themselves in other ways, right? So what's the way that the prison creates the conditions for this kind of violence to happen in the first place?
Well, it's something that the reason why the prisons were constructed, exactly, to isolate men and women in a space where they can police themselves, so to speak, and just not reimagine, but reinscribe the very system that exists outside. And however, whatever means they use to do that is is a reflection of what the relationships between men and women is on the outside. And it's just a more extreme version of that.
Right. Yeah, there's this line from I'm pretty sure it's from Otis to Melvin, and they're kind of going back and forth. And I think Melvin says, at least I didn't lose a hand. And then Otis retorts, yeah, but basically, who knows what you lost?
Right.
You may kind of lose a hand, but there's all these other things that you could have lost. I'm wondering what you wanted the reader to pull away in that moment if you thought about that. Like, what was the importance of that dialogue for you?
Well, Otis is a damaged individual, and much of his identity as a man was his ability to have sexual prowess, present himself physically as someone who is powerful, invulnerable, and who commands respect based on his physical attitudes, and that it is other people who have to comply to his authority. But he's lost a great deal of that while in Vietnam, not only physically in terms of an arm, but also his confidence. It's in some ways the feeling that somehow he is less than what he was, not just in terms of the loss of an arm, but to something psychically that he believes has happened to him that has put him in a situation where he has to prove yet again that he's capable of exerting power over others. And so, of course, he confronts Melvin with that, as you point out, when he says, well, at least I didn't lose a hand. Well, and challenges or infers or implies to Melvin that, well, you were in prison, so you might have lost something else, meaning your manhood. Exactly. You might have been raped, where you had no power to do anything about being dominated. And I guess Otis's view would be, at least I didn't have that happen. So there's a kind of one-upsmanship that goes on often among men and between both Otis and Melvin.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I didn't. By the time I read how Otis lost his hand, the manner in which he lost his hand, it made me think about the ways that men can sometimes opt for a vulnerability to escape a situation. So I thought that was fascinating
Yeah,
too. Even
yeah.
with Chili, it's like, well, now you're interestingly are vulnerable in this particular way to get out of a situation, and then look at the consequences of that. I found that very fascinating, and the one-upmanship as a result of it. Um, given that, now we've sort of talked about Otis and Melvin and Theo. Let's talk about some of the women in this story, because I didn't find any of the women to be submissive at all. They all have interesting, funny, quirky, rebellious responses. You know, the Deborah, the sister, you know, she comes up, I'm always just like, what is she refusing? You know, she has a keen sense awareness of the toxic masculinity that you mentioned and her rejection of it, and now how she takes pleasure in seeing men vulnerable. And then his mother, I love the story about they're going back and forth over whether he's Muslim now, but I laughed so hard at that part of the story. But yeah, just seeing these women that he's in relationship with navigate their relationship to him and navigate their relationship with other men. You know, so I found that fascinating. Then with Alice and Pauline, it's just, I mean, it's all so rich. And I just want to know, of the women, if you had a favorite character among them.
Well, I would probably say probably Deborah and Pauline. I
Your
think.
favorite? Oh, okay. Tell me more.
Well, with Deborah, as you have already pointed out, she is a lot tougher and a lot more savvy about the world, even as a younger person than Melvin is. And she has developed a sense of herself, asserting herself, even though she could be at risk or in jeopardy. She refuses to submit to the sort of the constructs of the way things are set up in terms of male authority. And this idea that she has that consciously deciding that the way for her to navigate the world is to study to become a kind of woman that she will observe or be in a relationship to other men where they are in a position of being vulnerable. So it's almost a conscious decision that she makes. Not only that she wants to be a nurse, but what will be the ways in which she can operate in that sphere to finally, to see men at their most vulnerable. And so that attracted me to her. And Pauline is just a force of nature. I mean, she is a woman who is a large and, sort of very formidable person. And she, in order to deal with the fact that in most instances, she is not going to be someone who is going to be attractive to other men. And so what she has uh, adopted to as a form of protection against men who would try to denigrate her because of the way she looks, that she is already out in front of all that, and she does damage before any damage can be visited upon her. So, and I think she said something about, I'm like sight, I'm everywhere you look. So
Yeah.
you can't do anything that can get inside my defenses because I'm already 3 or 4 steps ahead of you. And if you try to do anything or say anything that would undermine me, I've already made some other moves that will prevent that. And she also, as a result of that, is very perceptive. When she says, most uh, men and women they get into situations that are compromised for being touched. She says, I have my perspective
Right.
from not being touched, which gives me a view of the world and of other people that is a lot perhaps more insightful, because no one is coming at me for all of those conventional reasons, but that allows her to see more and to come at people aggressively if they even have a thought of trying to say something that would be injurious to her.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a yeah, when she makes that point about not being touched, it also made me think about Foucault when he writes about prisons being sites basically of like the denial of pleasure, denial of being touched, the denial of intimacy.
Yeah.
It made me, then think about Melvin, not having, he's eager, he's trying to get some, he is out, he is trying to find somebody, he's on the prowl, he's upfront about it, he's like, where y'all at, he's looking for people. But it made me think about how fat phobia, it serves as a sort of prison for people. It denies intimacy and touch, even for people who may desire it, because of this ideas about people who have large bodies, right? Then what she says, once I realized that the weight couldn't come off, right? So it seemed like she had worked through some attempt, or she tried, or something she knows about her body. And it's like, once again, ability is coming up, like the ways that people had to navigate the world, their desire for intimacy, the refusal of intimacy, the deny, all of it. Made me think about other kinds of prisons that keep us captive. Mm-hmm. And I thought her character was just written so, it's in many ways very familiar, very familiar of humor and, loudness as a deflection, also as protection, also as offense, right? These different moves that she's making. And then what she said about Deborah, like exactly that. I find deep resonance in that. I also want to talk about Alice, because it was like, okay, here's the love story, right? We're going to get somewhat of a love story. Maybe I was super, super hopeful about what it would become, because I found myself so attached to the characters, and really found myself rooting for Melvin. Even when he annoyed me, I still found myself kind of rooting for him. The story with the lawyer, I was just like, man, this lawyer is trying to make him Mumia, and he's not trying to be Mumia. He's trying to go home. He's trying to figure out how to navigate that. And it's I think it's representative of many more people in our Black freedom movement who don't become like a Mumia, who don't become an informant, but actually their lot is cast in all of these other ways that we need stories about. So I'm happy to write about it this way. And then by the time he reunites with Alice, I'm like, okay, some relief. And Alice, again, you see her frustration from these relationships. Mm-hmm. She's upfront saying, I'm not nervous about this. I just already know. I know what to expect. I know what's up. So I really love how their relationship demonstrates vulnerability and forwardness, and touch and denial of touch, all these things. I was curious if you wanted to share more about their relationship and what you think it may represent in the book.
Well, I think what she says near the end of the novel about that there's not a ghost of a chance that anything intimate could ever occur, anything substantial, if you try to shut me down. She's talking to Melvin, that because if I can't fight for the life that I want, then there's no point of even proceeding. Because for her experience has been that she has entered into relationships where she's been silenced, muffled, and to the extent to which she has accepted that, she has come to the realization that she's not going to accept that. And so, and she challenges, Melvin, and she knows that what it is that initially he wants. And she just, sort of calls him on that. And so forces him into questioning his assertion of himself, the sort of newfound freedom that he's going to, as you point out, has to go on the prowl because of this, of not having had any sexual contact in 2 years. And for Alice is that there are many ways of having contact or touch with someone, and the fact that often that there are women and men who choose not to become into some more intimate proximity with someone else because they have been in situations where they have been used and abused by people who present themselves as someone who is interested in or desires some very closer, intimate connection that involves communication,
Right.
opening up. And so she makes it clear to Melvin that he can say or play the games whatever, however he wants to, but she's not really interested in that. And so he is challenged to look at what it is that he believes attraction is.
Mm.
That is it only a kind of sexual urge or desire that doesn't really have very much to do with intimacy? And he has to sort of think about that. So is his desire less about communication with another human being, but more about sort of relieving himself of some, in the way that some human beings, all of us have to have releases, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those releases are substantially emotional. It's
Right.
just in this a surge, and then that's it. That's over. So I think that Melvin has to examine what it was that he was feeling when he left, and to call it what it is, and not to magnify it into something that it's not.
No, I think that's so key. That's so important. It's like, well, you're entitled to have those experiences, but don't conflate it. Like, don't try to pretend like that it's both. At the clarity, yes, yes. I know so many women who say, I'd rather have my peace than to have like that drama. That was so good. So why the reissue now? The book came out in 1978. What do you think of its reissue today? What do you think about its relationship to our current movement around lots of these questions of Black freedom, toxic masculinity, prisons? It's the book. It could have been written honestly at any decade in the last several generations, right? So I had to remember, like, oh, right, this book came out in 78. And so I would love to know what you think about its reissue and why now.
Well, it's very gratifying that after 43 years, the book has had a second life. I think that I would agree with you that there is much in the book, the novel, that resonates with our moment, whether that's questions of incarceration, issues of what women how women have redefined who they are, what their relationship is to whomever they feel some connection or even want a connection to, as well as men having to deal with how they are formed as males, and how you actively make choices that upend that or go against or try to reimagine what being a man is. And so there's the issues of class, that in terms of what the neighborhood that Melvin comes from, working class, Black community, and how there is a kind of hierarchy there in communities, in Black communities, working class communities. So there are many questions that I guess I was attempting to dramatize in the novel that still resonate at this moment. I mean, this is the first time I've actually looked at the book, because having, finished a book, I tend to not go back to it and sort of be trying to figure out what I might want to do next. So in listening to people such as yourself and others who talk about the book and raise questions about it, to me, it's as though that I am rediscovering the book in ways that I might not have even considered 43 years ago. So that is part of, I guess, for me, the gratification in becoming a reader of a book that I wrote, and how other people, what their experience has been as readers. So, I guess in going back to certain chapters in the book, I don't approach it in some ways as the person who wrote it, because I'm quite a bit removed from that person. It's not that I'm a different person, but I'm not that person who wrote the book. You sort of either more or less, or combination of both, of that Wesley Brown. And so some ways I sometimes either cringe or marvel at who is it who wrote this book.
Oh my gosh. I love cringing. I cringe and marvel with stuff I wrote last year. So I can't imagine 43 years, I think you said.
Yes.
Having to review, and what a gift, right? What a gift to be able to look back at a novel, wonderful piece of work you've written, and to have that ability to say, yeah, now we don't have to talk about this now, but I'm very curious about where you cringe and where you marvel. I am so curious about that. I just finished my first book, and the biggest fear that I had is the cringe. Like, what am I going to look, God willing, what am I going to look back on 20, 30 years from now? Just be like, what? What is this? What is this? So yeah, I'm very curious about where that is.
Well, I think since it's been 43 years, there's a part of me that would um, that would like to rewrite the whole book, but that's only a brief thought, because I think with a novel or anything that's creative, you create it, and of course, there are aspects that are flawed, as we are as human beings, and so I wouldn't, I had a thought about, well, maybe if I would change this, or I rewrite this, is that I think the book stands or falls on its own, and it is the book that I wrote, and I can't to revisit it in a way to rewrite it, is that the person who wrote that book wrote that novel, given all of the experiences that the writer had, and the things that they saw, the blind spots that they had. And there's no point in trying to defend it. It's just to allow another generation of readers to have at it, and to see where in the novel that they might find some value, something significant. So um, I hadn't really thought about parts that I would have cringed, but I think in
Or
reading,
Marvel, not just cringe. Oh God, no. Also Marvel. Like, what? I don't want to ask you how much you read. No, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. I'm also very excited and curious about what still makes you marvel after 43 years. It really is a beautiful book.
well, I guess that encounter between um, Melvin and the lawyer, I just was quite taken with that. It kind of really, I guess, just sort of threw me, because it was quite inventive in terms of this lawyer who really is not interested in Melvin as a person. He's interested in some abstraction of how Melvin's situation can be used to promote something that has nothing to do with Melvin as a person, but to some larger entity, some larger issue. So that I found, something that I had to say, wow, I actually wrote that. The party scenes.
Oh, the party scenes
Yeah.
were.
I was quite taken with, as well as the that the Dr. Blue sequence at the end, where he is uh, stabbed, and then he sort of is hallucinating, goes into shock, and has this sort of transmogrifying experience, and then comes back to consciousness with on a, I guess a stretcher or something, being attended to by this doctor who attempts to, I guess, persuade him that nothing really matters. He said, because he says he sees people come in who have been involved in some kind of self-destructive behavior, and and it's so repetitious that it has become numb to him. And he's challenging Melvin to come up with a reason or reasons why it is there, reasons why one should persist in trying to find a way to reimagine or reconstruct the world as it is. And Melvin doesn't necessarily have an answer, but I think, basically says that, well, I at least have to try. So that scene, I realized that I was very admiring of that this Wesley Brown from 43 years ago had actually written that. And the Freedom Highs. And that last sequence with Otis, very painful.
Yeah.
As I reread it, because he is so exposed that he has to find some way to close off the exposure.
Yeah.
And he provokes a situation that can only lead to disaster, because he really doesn't know who he's dealing with here.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yes. All those scenes. Yeah. Now recalling the scenes, the party scenes were great. At points, I don't know if you know, The Wood is this Black movie that came out, I think in the late 90s. Yeah, late 90s, early 2000s, with like Omar Epps, and it's about this Black boy.
What was the name of the film?
The Wood.
The Wood.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't know if I saw that.
Came out when like The Best Man came out.
Oh yeah.
Or like Love and Basketball, like a series. Yeah. It reminded, whenever the party scene, came up, it just reminded me of very vividly of like just good Black art, like just good art. Like it was like, I know these arguments, I know the rooms, it felt so familiar. So again, that this novel had been written in 1978 was just like, what, like, what's that, almost 20 years, as 13, 14 years before I was born. And I was just like, wow, these scenes feel so familiar. Even Riverside Drive, literally like everything. Yeah, so it's beautifully written. So excited, for people to reread the book, if they have read it then, as you have written it then and reread it now. And new generations of people are going to have access to it, and it's going to create, new art. It's going to inspire new art, new conversation. So thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much too, Derecka, because this has been quite illuminating for me to have this conversation with you, and you've given me a lot to think about, and have given me sort of new, different ways to look at what I was writing, what I wrote. So I really appreciate you, your willingness to do this, and I am very appreciative.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for hosting us at the bookstore. And now people are going to be able to watch this because it's recorded, and it's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like we've reached the top of the hour, but thank you to Wesley Brown and Derecka Purnell who joined us.
Thank you, Megan,
Literati.
for sort of pulling this together.
Yeah, of course. And just a reminder to your viewers that you can buy the book, and the link is in the chat. But otherwise, take care, everyone.
All right, Megan, you take care. Derecka, be well.
You too both. Bye.